So what do you guys want to talk about?
We want to talk funny with you, Tom Dreesen. We're talking funny with comedian Tom Dreesen. For our listeners, how I became a Tom Dreesen fan. In 2015, I spent 18 months in Chicago as a stand-up that was doing it 3 years at the time. And I don't know if Tom remembers this. He did a Q&A for any comedian that wanted to be there at the Laugh Factory on a Sunday afternoon.
Mm-hmm.
Tom talked to a bunch of up-and-coming comics at all level were there at the time. And he answered questions. Tom, I don't know if you remember that day or how often you do things like that, but it seemed like you took a lot of time out of your busy schedule that day and spoke to all us up-and-coming artists.
Oh yeah, and I do. Thank you. And I'm a stand-up comedian first, last, and always. But I give motivation talks for universities, for corporations, to students, and on 4 subjects: perception, visualization, self-talk, and develop a sense of humor. And I elaborate on those 4 points because I've read literally hundreds of books on the powers of the mind. I came from an impoverished background and et cetera, as a boy growing up into a very negative environment. And so I self-taught myself when I went in the military, and I didn't want to go back to that life, you know. And so, and I later became a motivation speaker, you know. But for comedians, I have a special one I give called "The Joy of Stand-Up Comedy and How to Get There." And so that's what I did at the Laugh Factory. I've done it in New York and in Chicago and LA, you know. But I did that day, and then I had a Q&A afterward. And I do remember you there, Steve. You were wearing a purple shirt and you had on a green hat.
You're full of shit, dog. That's funny.
Hey, we're saying you're all full of shit.
What made you first like get into stand up? Like what got you into it? Because I'm sure there wasn't. I mean, it probably wasn't that big then, right? Like what, you know?
I saw Steve doing stand up, and I said, if he can do that, I can do that.
Yeah, right.
You made it look easy.
Seriously, I never, ever, ever thought I'd be in show business. It was the furthest thing from my mind. I never thought about it. I grew up very poor. I had 8 brothers and sisters. We lived in a shack. It was a rat-infested, roach-infested shack. We had no bathtub and no shower, no hot water. I shined shoes in taverns. I set pins in bowling alleys. I caddied in the summertime. I sold newspapers on the corner, all to help feed my brothers and sisters. And none of this do I regret, by the way, you know, because that's part of my motivation talks. All of life is about perception. You know, it's how you perceive it to be. If you remember, Steve, I gave an analogy. I said, a little boy goes in the backyard and he's got a bat and a ball. And he said, I'm the greatest hitter in the world. And he throws it up in the air and he swings and he misses. He said, I'm the greatest hitter in the world. He throws it up the second time and he swings and he misses. He said, I am the greatest hitter in the world. And he throws it up the third time and he swings and he misses. He said, I'm the greatest pitcher in the world. It's your perception, you know. But anyhow, so I said all that. And at 16, I dropped out of high school. I was going to school with holes in my shoes and all that. Dropped out of high school. I worked in bowling alleys and I ran with a real tough crowd, a bunch of real bad boys, you know. And at 17, a judge helped me get in the Navy. And I spent 4 years in the Navy, and I served 9 months in a Marine Corps unit called NEGDF, Naval Emergency Ground Defense Force. I came out of the Navy, and I right away married. I got kids. I've got 3 kids. I'm going from job to job, wandering aimlessly. You know, I worked construction. I loaded trucks. I became a Teamster in Chicago, and then I dropped my Teamster card, and I became management. I was the foreman of all these Teamsters that I used to work with. I was a bartender. I was a private detective. I just went from job to job, not feeling fulfilled. And really at that time praying, saying, God, this can't be it. What is it I'm supposed to be doing on this planet? I'd be in a bar with my buddies at 2:00 in the morning saying, I don't belong here, but I didn't know where I belong. Honestly, was literally praying to God. And I joined a civic group called the JCs. the Junior Chamber of Commerce. They taught you leadership training programs. They taught you how to attack the problems of your community by serving on a committee, chairing a committee, learning how to share a committee, how to subcommittees, how to organize, Robert's Rules of Order. And at that time, the problem in one of our communities was our youth were using drugs, as it is today. So I wrote a drug education program teaching grade school children the ills of drug abuse with humor. I had a concept to make the kids laugh, get them laughing once they got relaxed, and then to plant the seeds of the ills of drug abuse. Helping me on this project was going to be a young white guy named John DeBoer. He said he'd help me. The night I proposed this to the JCs so they'd sanction it and run it as a JC project, a young guy graduated from Norfolk State College. E.I. DuPont recruited him into Chicago as a marketing representative. And he comes up to me after the meeting, a young black guy. He said, I'd like to help you with that program. I said, gee, I got a guy. Thank you. I got a guy. He said, in the following day, our prayers are answered. My buddy John DeBoer calls me and said, I can't do that project. I got a new job. I said, gee, what was that black guy's name? Oh, yeah, Tim Reed. So Tim Reed and I we rehearsed the program, go into the classrooms. The program became very successful. It became #1 in 50 states and 22 foreign countries. The JCs use it as a model program on how to at an elementary school. And one day, a little 8th grade girl walking out of the classroom said, you two guys are funny. You ought to become a comedy team. And the thought of a black-white comedy team intrigued us. No one had ever done that before.
Yeah,
right.
We're the first ones.
Now, what year was it? What year was that?
1969. We went on stage our very first time. No comedy clubs in America.
Right.
So we all black clubs in the North and the South, what they affectionately call the Chitlin Circuit, black-owned, black-operated nightclubs. And we ended up working all white nightclubs. Still, we worked the Playboy circuit for years, but we struggled. America was in turmoil in 1969.
Right. Oh, yeah. That was like right on the heels of all the civil rights stuff. Right. Yeah. I mean, right in the middle of it, I guess.
Well, Martin Luther King was assassinated. Bobby Kennedy was assassinated. The Civil Rights Act had only been passed 5 years prior to that. There were race riots in every major city in the country, and in my old neighborhood where I grew up at. I grew up in a predominantly black neighborhood, and a lot of that was part of my routines later. But yeah, America was in turmoil. Students were protesting the Vietnam War. I just gotten out of the service. Tim just got out of college. America was in turmoil, and here we were going across the land trying to make people laugh. It was it. And the fourth time on stage, a guy put a lit cigarette out in Tim's face.
What?
Wow.
And then
my question about that, Tom, is like, there's no comedy clubs. You start a comedy team, live comedy show with Tim Reed, and who's your competition, and how do you manage, what plan do you go into this to try to make it a profit at that time?
We start out like everybody else. First of all, no comedy clubs.
Right. None, right? None.
No. So we'd go to jazz clubs. We needed a place to work. We'd volunteer for every charity there was, we'd get on stage anytime we could, but we'd go to jazz clubs. And when the jazz artists would take these hole-in-the-wall jazz clubs, when they were going to take their break, we say, do you mind when you take your break, could we get up and do some stand-up? And there was jazz guys in those days like Sonny Stitt, Gene Ammons, Eddie Harris, great guys, great old guys. And they'd say, folks, this is our last number we're going to take a break. Well, when we take a break, we're going to sit down and enjoy the comedy of a comedy team. Hope you'll stick with us, and blah, blah, blah. And that's what we did. And then eventually I started a place in Chicago. I had gone to New York and I saw the improvisation when it started up. And these guys had a place to be bad. In those days, it was a singer, then a comic, a singer, then a comic. So I came back and I talked to a nightclub owner, a restaurant owner. Could I start a comedy room on his Monday nights? That was his bad night. And so it was called Le Pub. And we it was the first comedy room in Chicago, but it gave us a place to work out.
And how do you end up at the Comedy Store with you and all these legends? Like, how does that path navigate to Los Angeles, to Hollywood? How did it? Was there a low before it went to that?
Oh yeah, a couple of things. One is I didn't answer your question. How did we make money? we kept side jobs,
Right.
and those places paid very little money. We once did 6 shows and got $15 a piece.
Jesus Christ.
And he had a wife and 2 kids. I had a wife and 3 kids,
Right.
And that guy put a lit cigarette out in Tim's face and then tried to beat the bejesus out of me. And I boxed when I was in the service, and I could handle myself on the streets. But this guy outweighed me by 100 pounds, and he pummeled me. I mean, 2 of my Italian buddies jumped over the bar, and it became a real Donnybrook. But we'd only been on stage 4 times, and we got in the car that night. I was all beat up and bruised. Tim was scarred up, and Tim looked at me and he said, "Welcome to show business."
Wow.
But anyhow, that being said, the team stayed together 6 years, and we went through a lot of hard times. But finally, Tim decided he wanted to be more of an actor. And we wrote a book about that, by the way, in 2005 called Tim and Tom, An American Comedy in Black and White. And there's a lot of talk about maybe they're going to be doing a mini series on our life, on a 6-hour episode. Just talk about it, about what it was like. Somebody play me and somebody play Tim, of course, what it was like touring the North and the South as the first black and white comedy team. But the team split up. Now, in 1975, wherever you went in America, people say, "What do you do for a living?" You say, "I'm a stand-up comedian." The next question out of their mouth was, "Oh, yeah? You ever been on Johnny Carson?" And if you hadn't been on Johnny Carson in the eyes of America, you weren't a comedian. You might want to be one. You might go, but you weren't a comedian yet. Freddie Prinze did 1 appearance on The Tonight Show and got a sitcom the next day. So all of a sudden, all the comedians from all around the country began to migrate out to the West Coast. And I was one of them.
Wait, Freddie Prinze does 1 set and becomes famous?
1 set, and in 3 weeks later, he's on the cover of Time magazine. This Puerto Rican kid from Hell's Kitchen.
Yeah, I know Freddie Prinze. Yeah.
No, what I'm saying is that was the story. A Puerto Rican kid from Hell's Kitchen, a 19 years old kid, and the next thing you know, he's the hottest thing in the country. So, so we all came out here, and I came out here. I got a cell phone here. I'm going to shut off because every time I get a message, you get that ding and you think that my eggs are done or something.
Did you know Freddie Prinze, Tom?
I knew him real well. When I worked the Playboy circuit with Tim, when we did teen Playboy clubs, and 2 resorts. So Tim Reed and I worked them all. By the way, guys, what a great place for comedians to develop. You did 5 shows a night, and you did the penthouse and the playroom, and so you could really you could get your act tight, especially a comedy team. But Freddie worked the New York Playboy Club with us. He worked the penthouse. He worked the playroom. We worked the penthouse. And I met him. At that time, he was like 17. He lied about his age and told him he was 18, or he couldn't have the club, And we became friends. He came to Chicago with me and hung out with me and had Thanksgiving dinner with me, and I loved him. He was a wonderful, wonderful comedian and a very troubled young man, But anyhow, so we all came out here to the West Coast, and I was on stage every night. First of all, in order to get on stage at the Comedy Store, you had to pass Mitzi Shore's audition, which was far more pressure than even the first Tonight Show, because at that time, the Comedy Store was the only comedy club in Los Angeles on Sunset Boulevard.
Right.
The factory wasn't there. The improvisation wasn't there. This is before all that. And comedy became the rock and roll of the 70s. Every night at the Comedy Store, somebody was getting discovered. And so I was going on stage. First of all, I waited for like a month trying to get on. And finally, she looked at me, saw me do a 5-minute set and said, she said, "Yeah, you look like you worked for asked before." It's a funny thing about when old-time comedians get together. What the heck is that? Old-time comedians get together. If ever they talk about Mitzi Shore or Jay Leno, they have to do the voice. Jay, "Hey, you guys, what do you?" And then Mitzi, by the way, those voices aren't that far apart, But Mitzi,
you passed your first time in front of her?
Pardon me?
Your first time in front of Mitzi, you passed?
Yeah, she saw, but I had been, remind you, I had been with a team for 6 years, so I had stage, and that stuff. So I became a regular there, and then I worked my way up the system to becoming one of the stars of the Comedy Store. But I'm on stage every night at the Comedy Store with all these unknown comedians: Jay Leno, David Letterman, Robin Williams, Gallagher, Michael Keaton. I don't know whatever happened to all of them, but I'm here doing your show. So
Yeah.
but again, my point of that is that was 45 years ago. I worked at last weekend. I went on stage at the main room at the Comedy Store. I was on with Sebastian. I was on with Bill Burr. 45 years later, I'm still on that stage with the hottest comics of this era, which
That's
is really
crazy.
fun. Yeah, fun for me.
God bless you, Tom.
Pardon me?
Yeah, I said God bless you. I mean, like stories like this, and there's so many things that you said, and I keep referring back to that time that I had a chance to meet you and become a fan when I was in Chicago. One thing I remember you saying is that and I don't know if you still feel the same now with the internet and with podcasting, but I remember you saying you could be too old for New York, but you can never be too old for LA as a stand-up comic.
No.
Am I saying what you said correctly?
Yeah, I don't know if you paraphrase me, but I do say to comedians, you can never be 6 months too late, but you can be 6 months too soon. A lot of comics, all of us think we're ready before we are.
Right.
And never let them catch you dirty. If a talent scout comes to see you for whatever particular show you're trying to get on or something, if they come to see you and you're not ready, they have that in their memory. 2 years later, you'll say,
Forever.
have you seen, Brian Licata? They'll say, oh yeah, I saw him. He wasn't ready. They say, wait, that was 2 years ago. You know how much we grow in 2 years. But so that was one of the things I said, that you can never be 6 months too late, but you can be 6 months too soon before you audition. But again, talking about the age of a comedian, the dumbest shit I've ever heard in my life in comedy is when some dumbass comedy development person at 26 years old at Columbia Pictures says, we're going to do a show and we've got audiences of 26-year-olds, so we need to get a 26-year-old comedian. That's the dumbest shit that I've ever heard in my life, because funny is funny. I watched Rodney Dangerfield when he was 80 years old slay the audience at the Laugh Factory, and there was a crowd one night of a bunch of students from UCLA and USC. They combined themselves for something, and Rodney went up and destroyed the crowd. So and I do it on weekends at those places all the time. It has, what the hell is wrong? I've got this thing shut off and it's still popping on. Sorry, guys.
It's all good. Is it from do you have it on the computer? It could be from that. Yeah, that's probably what it is.
Next time it pops up, I'll try to come down. Anyhow, so what you heard that day, Steve, was probably something like that. But there's only one rule in comedy: be funny. That's the only rule we have. Be funny. Oh, I wish I could shut that off. Here, wait a minute. See if I can shut that off before we go any further. Where's it?
You can probably just open the messages program, and I think if you turn it off,
with you guys on, I'd probably have to leave this. I'd have to leave you. I don't want to leave you. These idiots that friends of mine, they're on a big thing on politics, and they got to get a ding every time something comes on.
Oh, in the group text.
Anyhow, the only rule, and the thing that's changed. I'm going to call this guy and tell him stop. The thing that has changed dramatically in comedy since I started is the language. I'm going to have to sing this. No, I got this phone shut off. Well, we got to live with it, I guess. Yeah. But the thing that changed dramatically in comedy since I started out is the language. When I started out, now I'm not a prude. I'm a street guy. I don't have a degree from academia. I got a doctorate in the streets. And I know every dirty joke there ever was and ever will be. And I told them aboard ships and every other place I was at. And Richard Pryor and I were close friends, and I loved his show. And I can do a stag roast with the best of them. But when I started out, there was no cable television. So you say, I'm in show business. That's two words, show and business. how am I going to take my product and get it nationally known? Well, you got to get on the Tonight Show. Okay, well, how do I get on the Tonight Show? You got to work clean. You got to write jokes that can make grandma and grandpa, mom and dad, and the kids laugh. You know, and then that's how 26.5 million people watch that show every night. So one appearance on the Tonight Show and your whole life changed. I did one appearance on the Tonight Show. The following day, a guy named from New York, a guy named Lee Curlin, head of CBS at that time, signed me to a development deal. I was married. I had 3 kids and no money. I couldn't pay. I had $225 a month rent, and I couldn't pay it. And the following day, after the Tonight Show, I got a check for $10,000. I got $1,850 a month for CBS. My groceries, my rent, everything was paid for 1 month.
Right.
And I mean, for 1 year.
Right.
So then I could work on my craft, so that's how important that show was. But I had to write that kind of material. I ended up doing 61 appearances on the Tonight Show. And then all of a sudden cable television came along and you could say whatever you wanted to say.
Do we lose sound?
No.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Do you think there's anything like equivalent to that now as far as shows go? Because cable TV is just really, it's not as popular as it once was. There's not many things that like everyone watches all the time like that anymore.
Yeah, there's one. It's Joe Rogan.
Yeah, that's what I think too.
I'm a huge fan. He's done wonders. And this is the guy that was rejected at the Comedy Store and a lot of other problems in his life, but he pursued on. He's also, aside from being a very good stand-up comedian, he's a brilliant guy. And also, he's not only brilliant, but he can take both sides and listen to both sides. When I was in the Marine Corps unit, my Marine drill instructor used to always talk about put yourself in the mind of your enemy. Always put yourself in your enemy's mind. And when I studied political science in junior college, when I came out of the service, the professor would say the same thing. He would make you, if 2 of us had opposing political views, he would take the view that I was passionate about and make me take your view. And we would debate one another, And Joe Rogan is real good at that, But again, 11 million people follow him every night, so you can, it can launch your career.
Yeah, for sure.
The other thing too is and I think I told Steve this in Chicago, all the comedians. You young guys today, this social media. Look what Dane Cook did. Dane Cook, when MySpace first came out, he monopolized that. He started 15,000 seat arenas. This guy sold out Madison Square Garden from the internet. In my day, the stairway to stardom was a Tonight Show. In your day, it's this thing we're doing right now.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
Brian, you know that better than anybody. That's what you do.
Yeah, that's why we love this. I'm doing this from pretty much my kitchen. We can record and produce content, every day, all the time, with a lot less money than you used to need to do a radio or TV show with,
Yeah. So me and Brian met at a comedy show in Atlantic City that I was on. And he was a fan of my work, and we just connected and became friends. He's not a stand-up, but this is what he does. And he's developing his voice as an artist with the virtual, and me as a stand-up, still finding my way. And it's funny, Tom. Like when I talk to guys like yourself, how long have you been in show business? Over 50 years?
52 years.
So how do you measure success? What's a failed comic as opposed to a successful career in show business? Do you know how to answer that question? Is that subjective?
How about this? Success is living the life you want. That's success.
Yep.
If you want to be a wino and you're a wino, you're a success. Success is the life you want. All I ever wanted, all I ever prayed for when I first started out was that if I could make a living as a stand-up comedian, I was overwhelmed with that thought. I never, I'm going to digress here. The first time I went on stage with Tim Reed, something I had written got a laugh. And I was on stage the first time. It was like one of the B movies where the dark clouds open up and a sun bursts through my whole body. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, this is what I want to do. I want to be a stand-up comedian. I found it. This is what I want. My whole being lit up. I wrote something original that got a huge laugh in that crowd. And I said, wow. The next morning, I'm telling you guys the truth, I couldn't sleep. It was a Friday night. I couldn't sleep all that night. I get up in the morning, I go to the church. When I was a little boy, I was an altar boy. I make it sound like I'm a real pious person, but I'm not. But I'm spiritual, and I have a faith. I believe in a higher power. So I went to that church. It was a Saturday morning. There was no one in the church. It was an empty church. And I prayed. I said, God, I now know what I want. I want to be a stand-up comedian. If you could let me make my living as a stand-up comedian, I'll never ask for anything else. I'll do charity work and all. Now, 50 years later, I went back to that church. And that was September 1969. In September 2019, I went back to that church and I gave a sermon on the power of prayer and how it works. And I said to the audience, I said that I knelt right over there. And all I asked was, could I God, let me make a living as a stand-up comedian. And I've done that now for 52 years. I never said, can I become a star? Could I have my own sitcom? Could I have all this? Just the thought that you could make a living as a stand-up comedian. And let me give you an example when I said to them about the power of prayer. I said, how many of you in that audience, in this congregation, were thinking about somebody and you hadn't seen them for a long time and the phone rings and it's that person? I said, how many of you, raise your hand, if you're walking down the street one day thinking of somebody and you turn the corner and you ran into that person and you said, I was just thinking of you. And they said, you know what, I was thinking of you. The whole congregation raised their hand.
Yep.
I said, we human beings can transfer thought, and we can. Obviously we can. Well, then how much can you transfer thought to a supreme being and a supreme being back to you? It isn't rocket science to me. I really believe in that. I believe in that power of prayer. Anyhow, I know this is not the kind of conversation that.
No, I love hearing things like that because, I have a similar story, but it's reverse. I was 8 months in and I'm from South Philly. Fun fact about me, Tom, I'm a South Philly Italian. I know you're a Chicago Irish Catholic. So we're pretty close, I'm
Italian. I'm Irish Italian.
Okay.
My biological father is a Sicilian and my mother is full-blooded Irish. And by the way, I worked Italian clubs in South Philly. I was stationed in South Philly, and I used to hang out at bars on Broad and Porter and I worked Palumbo.
I grew up on 13th and Porter.
Oh, really?
Yes, sir. Right near the Methodist Hospital.
Oh, there you go. Well, you came from a city, Frankie Avalon and James Darren and Fabian and Bobby Rydell and Joey Bishop and David Brenner and Bill Cosby, and it goes on and on and on.
Yep. But when I started, there was only 2 clubs in Philly. It was how they say white room and a black room, and I used to hang out at the Black Comedy Club, the Laugh House, because I knew Kevin Hart started there, and comedians really weren't welcoming to me when I first started out. I was very personable, but I would show up at comedy clubs like it was a job interview. I honest to God, I used to show up with a suit and tie, and I would sit at the bar, and I would overly tip the staff, like outrage, like I probably made them feel uncomfortable. Like I used to give them 50s and 100s.
You do overtip.
Yeah,
like more so than anybody really should overtip.
Yeah, I'm bad like that. So but I got people's attention, and not based on my performing, but they offered to give me a chance, and I made a mistake. I was hanging out way too much, and I was telling people I was a comic, and I wasn't yet. And I did like 4 or 5 shows, and then there was a headliner there, and he said, "Hey, on the late show, you want to do a spot?" And I was like, "Yeah, I would love that." He was like, "All right." He's like, "What I'm going to do is I'm going to bring you up on the loudspeaker. I'm going to introduce you, and you do a cold opening, and then you bring me up." So he gets on the loudspeaker. He goes, I want to invite the best comedian in Philadelphia,
boy,
Steve Rinaldi. Now, I go up there. Now, looking back 10 years later, I really didn't bomb because Tom, you know, you have to know this better than anybody, because I know you were a well-known opening act for Frank Sinatra for years. There's a skill set of doing material as people are entering the room and sitting.
Mm-hmm.
I obviously a couple months in, I didn't know this, so I'm thinking I'm bombing, but I had jokes, but it just I got panicky and I turned white. It didn't end good at all. And when I left for Jamaica the next day with my girlfriend at the time, and the whole trip, 9 days, all I talked to her about is how I have to get back on stage because I feel like I didn't do my job. Like, that's crazy. Like, I had to get back. Most people would run after that. I got obsessed. After that moment, I got obsessed. And my hand to God, Tom, since that time, every chance I get, I'm weird. Like, I do comedy on my own terms. So if I drive to the New Jersey Turnpike, or I'm driving on the PA Turnpike, as I'm passing these towns and it's after 6 o'clock, I'm Googling open mic night, comedy clubs. Because just to let you know, I still have a day job. Comedy's a part-time job for me right now because it's just, I'm not making enough money to support my family just yet. But ever since that moment, I've averaged probably stage time 12 to 15 times a week since that.
Good.
And I just became obsessed from that low. Whereas your story, which is interesting, it was a high. Mine was a low.
But see, that's what made you. If you would have never got back on stage again, then I would have told you you're not right for this business.
Right.
There's no failure in stand up. We just learn from every time it doesn't work, and we're all part of that journey. A lot of times they'll say to me, Tom, will you go watch my niece, my nephew, my uncle, my brother, whatever? He's doing open mic at some place, the Laugh Factory or the Comedy Store, and I'll out of friendship, I'll say, yeah. And I'll go watch this young girl or young guy bomb, not do a great set. First of all, open mic nights are the worst because in the room are 20 guys or girls who want to get on. And so they're not going to really laugh at you a lot, right, because they don't want to see somebody score and they have to follow it. So it's terrible. But, when I go watch this person and they don't do well, they'll come up to me and say, what'd you think? I said, I'll come back next week and watch them. And if I come back next week and they're on again, I say, she's going to be all right, or he's going to be all right. Because that's the part of it, is the getting up. When you become a comedian, obviously the difference between an amateur and a pro is when you get paid in most sports. When paid, you become a professional. But when you become a professional stand-up comedian, to me, is when you get consistent. When I started out like anybody else, I did a real good set, and then I did an offset. Then I did a fair set, but then I did a bomb. And then I did a good set, and then I did 2 good sets in a row. And then I had a bad night, and then I did 4 great sets in a row. And then I had off night, and pretty soon I did 10. Now I'm on a roll. Now I started getting consistent. And that's when you start to become a professional comedian, when you become consistent. And
I was just saying to somebody, I am so due for a bomb. It's been like I swear to God, it's been like 2 years, and we're always itching for that one, right, Tom? It's like, it's
well, when you really get to be a professional, you can read a room. I can walk into a room and tell you I'm not going up. The order. One thing. I don't go on when you're eating. People have to stop laughing to eat or stop eating to laugh. And when people are. You can see what I'm doing. When people are eating, they don't laugh. They point the fork at you.
Yeah.
So you got a small ceiling, laughter is sound. It hits a ceiling and comes at you. I was under contract in maybe 9 different hotels in Las Vegas. I love the Sands Hotel, the Desert Inn. I love the Riviera. I love the Golden Nugget downtown. They had low ceilings, and you kill. I hated Caesar's Palace, and I hated the MGM Grand. High ceilings, and when I first went to Vegas, opening for Sammy Davis, they served food, and it'd be one thing, the comedian would die a death at Caesar's Palace. Sammy, knowing this, when I opened for him, he went out and did 4 songs. So they cleared that room with food and everything, and then he brought me out.
Wow, that's a classy move. Wow.
But see, Sammy paid dues. He knew it.
Right.
Again, I'm going back to certain things have to be in order for us to score. I'm not going to let you. Corporate dates. They'll say to me sometimes, "Now listen, when we bring the dessert out, we want to bring you." I say no. Now. By the way, I say this now because I can say that. Earlier in my day, I needed the money. I needed the rent money. Okay, bring me on while they're at a buffet. I'll tell jokes while they get their food. I mean, I'd do anything because I needed the money. Today, I let them know before the gig. I don't go on while people are eating, and I don't go on while waiters and waitresses are pouring coffee and running around, breaking up your rhythm.
Right.
So certain things have to be in order for. So I can go do those shows like anybody else, but it won't be as good as I am or you are. And so. You know what I did one time? This corporate woman was adamant. You've got, and they were paying me real good money, and it was adamant. It was at a Marriott hotel, and she, you've got to go on, and we're running. See, they always run the program real late, but then they put the comedian on to die like a dog, So she said, "Oh, you got to go." And I said, "You know why I won't go on while they're still eating?" I said, a couple of years ago, I was working at a hotel. And a woman was laughing, and the food went down her throat. She started choking. She landed on the floor. She died. They sued the hotel. They sued the client. She's, "Oh, well, all right. Now, by the way, that didn't happen. I just made it up.
Of course.
For you.
Yeah, good for you. Yeah, great story.
Because we have to have things in order for us to score. I mean, I can do it, and we'll do all right. But while people are filing in and out, let me tell you what I used to do in 20,000 seat arenas, and with Sinatra. You're opening for Frank Sinatra, and Steve, I'll give you this. This is your assignment. By the way, I worked in Philadelphia, the Spectrum. I opened for Frank Sinatra at the Spectrum, but Nassau Coliseum, for 14 years in 45, 50 cities a year. But you walk out in front of 20,000 people. Now, Steve, first of all, I tell you, hey, Steve, we're at the Spectrum. It's 5 minutes before the show. There's 20,000 people out there. Steve, I want you to go out there and stand in the center. They're all around you. They're behind you. You're in the middle. They're all around you. Steve, I want you to go out there and stand in the center. And for the next 45 minutes, there's 20,000 people out there. I want you to hold their attention. Oh, one more thing, Steve. I want you to hold their attention, but I want you to make them laugh for 45 minutes. Oh, one more thing, Steve. I want you to hold their attention and make them laugh, but I want you to make them laugh when you want them to laugh. I want you to pull the strings and the emotions of 20,000 people. No props, no tricks, no charts, no special arrangement, no orchestra, no special lighting, nothing, just you and 20,000 people. And one more thing, Steve, not one of them came to see you. That's your assignment.
Man, and that was your career at how long did you open for Frank?
14 years. But here's the thing. That also was my moment of knowing that I had it. Because what I did was, now again, I knew when you go out there, you don't open with your A material. You know what I mean? You walk out there, if there's 20,000 people in that arena, 3,000 are still trying to find their seats.
Right.
I've got to bring their attention to me. This is my moment. I got to bring their attention to me. Now, I don't go out there and start saying my A material. I go out there and I would say, how many of you out there thought Frank Sinatra was coming out? Applaud. Because the orchestra would bring you out.
Right.
And I didn't say raise your hand. Listen, I said, how many of you out there thought Frank Sinatra was coming out? Applaud. And they'd applaud. I say, I know just how you feel. I'm a little bit disappointed myself. Now, I'd say, how many of you out there are in this arena for your very first time? Applaud. And they'd applaud. Again, I say, how many of you out there seeing Frank Sinatra live? Your very first time? Applaud. And they'd applaud.
Right.
I say, how many of you out there aren't wearing any underwear? Applaud. You see what I'm doing? I talk, you react. I talk, you react. I'm doing that.
You're training them.
I'm bringing them to me. I talk, you react. And then I would do a couple of jokes about that area, about Philadelphia, or wherever I was performing at. couple of local jokes that even though we just flew in that day, that I knew about that. And then once I got up, then I went into my A material. But the first thing was to bring that focus to that center stage. If you walk out there in front of 20,000 people and you go right into your A material, it's going to go into the tank and you're going to start out going downhill. You know? Again, educating that crowd, getting caught into my voice, my rhythm. You know?
And did you headline before working for Frank?
Well, I would headline. You know, I toured for 3 years with Sammy Davis Jr. as his opening act. I toured with Smokey Robinson. I toured with James Darren, Frankie Avalon, Mac Davis, Tony Orlando and Don, Gladys Knight, the Pips. I toured. So
you were out of the club circuit. You were There wasn't a comedy club circuit at that time.
That's right. I never worked the comedy club circuit. What I was lucky for is that corporations started hiring me, where I'd headline for AT&T, for IBM.
Right. Yeah.
You know, I would be the
hey, Brian, just so you know, those are the money. That's the
I'm
money.
sure. I'm sure they are.
Those
yeah.
Money gigs. Tom got in with the right people, buddy. There you go.
Again, that's from working clean, to be honest with you.
Right. Yep.
A lot of agents were afraid to use comics because they'd lose their client. If you had a client with IBM.
Oh, yeah.
So I read that in Sebastian's book. That was one of the things before he became what people call a comedy superstar. He worked an hour clean, and he was known to do corporations like Budweiser, Microsoft. Like he was good at what he did with those events, you know.
Today it's a little. You can probably work a little more, blue. But in those days, the agent was afraid to lose his client.
Right.
And I would say if you're doing for IBM and they had all their clients in, they were afraid you're going to insult their clients. And,
right.
So they call them safe acts. That he's safe. That you're not going to. And that's what I was considered at the time. But by the way, again, like I said, I can do a stag roast with the best of them. But it's easy to write that kind of material. The problem with the word fuck is that it's a noun, it's a pronoun, it's an adjective, it's an adverb, and so you can go there whenever you're
whenever you need. Safe. It's easy.
I'm gonna invite you over to my parents' house one night for dinner. You wouldn't believe how often they use.
Well, but again, I always say my grandmother says fuck. You're not shocking anybody with it anymore.
Right.
It's now become, again. I'll tell you something. Years ago, Steve Allen wrote a book called Funny People, and he wrote a chapter about me in it. It was around 1976, I think. At that time, that there was, if you asked 100 people, how many of you seen a comedian live? 3 of 100 would say, I saw one live. 97 of 100 did not see a comedian live. Saw them on TV maybe, but then comedy clubs. There were no comedy clubs in America, and then there were 550 comedy clubs. Tulsa, Oklahoma had 3. So all of a sudden, comedy clubs became, the rage. And so you had to fill those slots. So, all around the country, these young kids were going to comedy clubs, and the comics were, fuck this and fuck that, and all their sex and all the other kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. So they thought, oh, that's comedy, and a lot of the comics grandfathered their way in with that kind of comedy, and then got a huge following, and a lot of people thought saying the word fuck was pushing the envelope,
Did Sinatra ever make you work, allow you to work blue?
Now off stage, Frank, I stayed at his home 6 times a year. We hung out till dawn. I'd drive to the desert, so we were 2 street guys. He was from Hoboken, and I was from the south side of Chicago. So we'd say whatever you want, but he never. One night at Caesar's Palace, I had a heckler, but he wasn't a bad heckler. He was. I teach comics how to qualify hecklers, but I got him into my rhythm and let him. I gave him so much rope he hung himself, And,
right.
I said in there, and it got a big laugh. But I can't do the whole bit for you. But I established what kind of guy he was, and then I asked him, "What would you do about this?" And when he answered, I went, "No shit," and they got a huge laugh because the audience was in on it, right? Later, Frank said to me, "Tommy, you're funny. You don't have to swear on stage. You're funny without swearing." Now, today, how mild is that? But
right.
He said to me one night, I said, "Why do we wear tuxedos on all your shows?" He said, "Tommy, if we were going to do a show for the king and the queen, would we wear a tuxedo for royalty? And I said, well, yeah. He said, well, that garage mechanic from Detroit and his waitress wife who work all year long to get enough money to buy 2 tickets to our show, they're just as much royalty as the king and the queen. And we have to do a command performance for them the same way we would do for the king and the queen. I said, okay. And that was, but you know what, by the way, it's his show and he paid me real well. So, you know, the headliner, you're an opening act. You owe it to that headliner. If that headliner wants you to come and work for them, they can dictate policy. They can say, look, you know, Steve, I want you to do 20 minutes. I want you to do 15, whatever they want. And
yeah,
Steve,
I got 4 dates this month, and he told me I need you to do 15 to 20 clean for every show.
well,
And it's paying well. It's paying well for me. So, you know, I haven't had rules in a while. The last time that happened was when I opened for Dom. You know, he told me, he said to me, you know, you're Italian, I'm Italian, you're from Philly, I'm from Philly. Do me a favor, lay off that. And he said that to me like 5 minutes before I went up.
oh my God.
Guess what? I got through it. And then after the show, we're talking about it, like me and you, Tom. And what he said to me, he said, I opened for Cher for a number of years. And situations like what happened tonight make you stronger.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, you know, Sammy Davis paid dues like no one paid, and he was so good to comedians. He loved comedians, and so did Frank, by the way. But I said to Sammy, "How do you want me to?" It was his show. When your name on the marquee puts asses in the seats, then you have some say so in the show. When someone that big like Sammy Davis or Frank or whatever, Smokey, you know, you say to him, "What do you want me to do? How much time?" What I said to Sammy, "What should I wear?" Sammy said, I think we should dress at least as good as those who come to see us. Mm-hmm. So the first show in Las Vegas was always a little more dressier than the second show, or wherever we were. You know, Frank insisted on a tuxedo except for closing night when we wore a suit. You know, but again, that's your job as an opening act to get that audience ready for the headliner. You know, and Sammy, a lot of stars didn't want you to kill. They didn't want it to be hard to follow. Sammy loved it if you killed because he was so confident in his show. Like,
all right, so I got to ask you a question that I think our listeners will appreciate. Tom Dreesen and Frank Sinatra, I'm sure you guys went out to dinner on numerous occasions all those years. Who picks up is Tom Dreesen ever allowed to pick up that check? Or is Frank old school Italian and fights with you? Like what happens in those moments?
Frank was truly old school Italian and picked up checks for 20, 40, 50 people. But I insisted when I started touring with him after about a year, I insisted that whatever city we were in, one of those nights, dinner's on me. He'd go, nah. I said, no. And I would set up the restaurant and I'd talk to his secretary at that time, Dorothy Ullman. I said, Dorothy, there's a place called Kelly Mondelli's or wherever we were going. And Frank can bring as many people as he wanted. He'd bring Julie if he wanted, he'd bring Barbara, whatever. And that tab is on me. Now, Frank really didn't want me to pick up the check, but Dorothy told me later that he really thought that was pretty cool. He said, you know, Tommy picks up the check because I'm flying in his private jet all over the world. He's paying me real good. I'm staying in his home 6 times a year. This guy, he was the most generous human being I ever met in my life. By the way, you brought him a pack of Camels, he gave you $100. You brought him a cup of coffee, he gave you $100. You brought Jack Daniels, Jack in the Splash, he gave you $100. You know the great story about that? He's coming out of Mame San restaurant one night and the valet Parker pulled up his car and Frank said, what's the biggest tip you ever got? And the kid said $100 and Frank gave him 2 $100 bills. So by the way, who gave you the $100? He said, you did last Friday, Mr. Sinatra. You know.
Were you ever around him and Don Rickles?
Oh, I can't tell you how many times. Yeah.
Was that like ball breaking relationship they had? Was that a real thing or was that played up for the camera?
Well, first of all, you're Italian. We play busting your onions. You're born busting onions. You know, that's what we do. You know, and Rickles was Jewish, but he would bust onions like no one could bust onions. You know, and yeah, he would. And Frank got a big kick out of it. You know the great story. I'm sure you've heard that. Rickles, when he was a young comedian, he wasn't married at the time. He was a young comedian. He only met Frank one time.
Yep.
Well, I'll tell it for those who haven't heard, but he only met Frank one time, and Frank knew who he was. He was a new comedian. And Frank was in Patsy's in New York on West 57th Street, and Rickles was with a young girl dating, and they're eating, and she looked across the room and she said, "Oh my God, there's Frank Sinatra." And Don said, "Yeah, Frank comes in all the time." She said, "You know Frank Sinatra?" He only met him one time. He said, "Yeah, I know Frank." She said, "If I could meet Frank Sinatra, I'd do anything." And she reached across the table and squeezed his hand and said, "Anything." So Rickles gets up and he goes over to Frank and said, "Frank, hey, he said, 'Oh, hey, Don, how you doing?' He said, 'Frank, the girl I'm with is a big fan. Do you think you might stop by our table and say hello?' He said, 'I'm getting ready to pay the check.' He said, 'Yeah, I'll do that.' Frank said he finished what he was doing. He got up, he walked clear across the restaurant, and he said, 'Hey, Don, how you doing?' And Rickles looked up and said, 'Not now, Frank. Can't you see I'm with somebody?'"
And there's one that I love that story. And there's one other
priceless.
one. And there's one other one that, because I read your book, Still Standing, and I've heard so many stories of yours with Frank, but Don Rickles had a story about Sinatra, how Frank was hot tempered, and they were in a restaurant and he threw the plate against the wall, and Don Rickles said,
"No, you know you did.
You passed the salt."
No, you're going to kill the punchline. What happened?
I destroyed. I messed up the joke.
Frank was so mad at the restaurant about the food, he grabbed a bottle of ketchup and he threw it across the room, and it hit the wall and splattered all over, and it got real quiet. And Rickles said, "Hey, Frank, pass the ketchup." That's what it was.
I ruined the joke.
Yeah. Well,
way to go, Steve. Way to go.
50 years,
I was at Frank's house one night, and we had two big tables of 10 people at each different table. And Rickles was talking to Barbara Sinatra. And Frank was saying, "Don, Don, Don, Don." And Rickles ignored him. He had his back to Frank. And he kept talking to Barbara Sinatra, Frank's wife, And so finally, Frank is going, "Don." And Rickles turned around and he said, "Frank, leave me alone. I'm talking to somebody who's coming into a lot of money." I did the Dean Martin roast with Don Rickles. He was, first of all, I loved it when I'd go to his shows and he'd rag me, because if Rickles brought you up in his act, you made it. He didn't pick on somebody. He picked on people that he thought, were celebrities and could take it.
And something that I think's unusual is that, like, a lot of stand-ups from my generation, they term crowd working comics as lazy, or they don't get as much respect. What's your thoughts on that? And did Don ever get that kind of backlash?
There's only one rule in comedy: be funny.
Right.
Said earlier, be funny. So
yeah.
Rickles was funny. I don't get crowd working. Jimmy Brogan's one of the best crowd working comics I've ever seen in my life. He's got a wealth of material in his head, and he ad-libs like crazy. So that's what you do. The hard part about that is it's hard to do. In my day, to get to the Tonight Show, you had to have a tight 6 minutes. So I had to get 22 to 26 laughs in my tight 6 minutes. If you're a crowd working comic, you can't do that on a TV.
Right. Yeah, you can't.
By the way, Robin Williams was never good at the Tonight Show or those shows doing 6 minutes. Robin could do an hour and he'd kill you. But to put him in a box and make him only do 5 to 6 minutes, he couldn't do it. Rickles was a master at it.
Who's your favorite comedian to watch right now? Your favorite, like, current comedian performing?
Wow, there's so many. What I'm about to say to you, you're going to think it's corny, but it's like a Will Rogers thing. But I never met a comedian I didn't like on stage. I mean, off stage, I may not like him, and they may not like me. But on stage, anybody who, before I was ever a comedian, I love comedians. The thought that a guy could go up there and make people laugh with his vocabulary, with his vernacular, with his inflection, his timing, that was amazing to me. So anybody who has enough chutzpah to get up on stage and try to make people laugh, you already won my heart. But there's so many out there today. I mean, I worked with Sebastian and Bill Burr last week at the Comedy Store. They both killed me. I went out and watched both of their sets after I finished my set. And they're really, top-notch comedians out there today.
Yep.
Again, I always liked Joe Rogan. I always thought that he had this kind of, here's the thing.
Hey, Tom, I'm going to cut you off just because I don't want to forget this question.
Okay.
For somebody that knows them both well, right? Leno or Letterman, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you think, why was that always, if you separate the show, why their comedy styles? Why was there always a debate there? Where did that all? I heard that feud. You were there for it, like before it even started. Why was that a thing? From before the whole Tonight Show thing started.
First of all, they're both good buddies of mine. David and I are a lot closer because David and I played basketball together. We played racquetball together.
Okay.
I knew him the first day he drove out to Los Angeles in a red pickup truck. So that's how long I've known David Letterman. And let me tell you a funny story, and then I'll get on to answer your question about that feud. But David Letterman called me about 6 months ago. He said, Tom, every time you do an interview or I do an interview, we always tell the same story about how we met. I pulled up in front of the Comedy Store. It was my first night there. I saw your set. You came off stage in the parking lot. I told you that I enjoyed your show, and we became friends. I said, yeah. He said, well, it's a boring story. I said, but it's the truth. He said, I don't care if it's boring. He said, from now on, tell people you came off stage. I had stole some of your material, and you beat the hell out of me in the parking lot. I said, now, why would I want to say something like that? He said, because it's a better story. Now, 2 weeks go by, and he calls me, and he said, Tom, do you know the governor of Illinois? And I said, no, I met him, but I don't know him. He said, well, Dave had some issue that he wanted to talk to the governor of Illinois about. And I said, but I know who the Senate Majority Leader is, a friend of mine named John Cullerton. I could call him. And he said, okay. So I called John Cullerton, and I told him the issue Dave was looking to rectify. And he said, oh, Tom, there's a new statute on that. Tell Dave not to worry about that. We're taking care of it. I said, John, could I give Dave your number? And if he called you, would you explain that to him? He said, sure. And so I said, oh, John, by the way, when you tell Dave the reason you helped him is because you helped him because Dreesen beat the hell out of him in the parking lot at the comedy. He said, okay. So now John's a good guy. Now, 10 minutes go by and I knew the phone rang and it was Letterman. I picked up the phone. He said, didn't I tell you that's a better story? I told you it's a better story. But Letterman was a broadcaster from the Midwest who wanted to be a writer when he came out to LA. Mm-hmm. And he was a writer. And he, like any other writer, he'd get up at the Comedy Store and try to get on the Comedy Store, get up and try out some of his material. Well, he was very good at handling hecklers too. Jay Leno, without a doubt, is a brilliant stand-up comedian. Jay Leno, whenever we were out in the parking lot, all of us, and they said, Jay's going on, we'd go in the back and watch him. Because Jay was and is. Jay could do 2 hours right now and never say the word damn or hell and have you on the floor. He's a very, very good stand-up comedian, and Letterman adored him for that. Letterman really liked Jay's act, But when the late shows came out, David was sure to be the heir apparent. Let me digress for a minute too. I would watch Dave do stand-up, and I'd help him with jokes. He'd help me with jokes. Dave Letterman opened for Helen Reddy one time. I got him a gig with Tony Orlando and Don at one time. Mm-hmm. He could hold his own on the stage, but he didn't like it. He didn't enjoy it at all. But the first time I watched him go out and host the Tonight Show, his first Tonight Show was very good, by the way. It was like 2 weeks later, they let him host the Tonight Show. When I saw him walk out in that stage on a TV set, I went, oh my God, he's home. That's where he belonged. On a nightclub stage, when I go on a nightclub, that's where I belong. I'm comfortable there. That's where Jay, but David in a TV studio, that's where he belonged. So now he was to be the heir apparent for the Tonight Show. And Jay Leno got the job. And David was very upset about that and felt that there were some underhanded things that happened, and he's got his story and Jay's got his story, but I don't know. But I want to go back to something else that you were talking about stand-ups. When the Candid Camera had a wonderful line on their show, caught in the act of being yourself. When you begin to evolve as a stand-up comedian, a lot of comedians are a continuation of themselves, and other comedians have a stage persona. I'm sure you know them, Steve. There's comics out there that's not. David Letterman is not the same guy when David Letterman walks out on when he do his show, that's not the David Letterman I hang out with. That was his stage persona. A lot of comedians have a stage persona, and others are a continuation of themselves, as I am. But I always say that you really start to grow as a comedian when you're a brand new comedian and you're out there. Most comedians do an impression of another comedian when they start out because they know that worked. So I can watch a new comedian and say, oh, he likes Jerry Seinfeld, or he likes Sebastian, or he likes Bill Burr, whatever. Mm-hmm. They might be doing an impression of that. But one night you're out there and you let a little bit of you out. And if it doesn't get a laugh, you pull back in and you start doing that impression again of a stand-up comedian. You're acting like a stand-up comedian. One night you let a little bit of you out, you ad libs, and it gets a laugh. And another night you let a little bit more of you out, and it gets a laugh. And pretty soon you start letting more of you out. And one night you become you on stage. And that's when you start to grow in leaps and bounds. Sebastian, Bill Burr, what you see is what you get. That's who they are. They're caught in the act of being themselves, and that's when you start to grow as a stand-up comedian.
And did that moment happen for you before you started working with Frank, or?
Oh, long before. When I started working with Frank, I had done about 35 Tonight shows at that time. I was already established.
Right.
One of the things that was good about normally when you open for Frank Sinatra, obviously they came to see Frank. But I had enough TV exposure that you could hear people say, "Oh, I saw him before. Oh, I like him," or or there are people saying, "Who is this?" But
how do you get that job? Do you right place, right time? Like, did you know him beforehand? How does that opportunity even get there? Like,
from being glib at the right time. I was opening for Smokey Robinson at Caesars in Lake Tahoe, mm-hmm. and it was fate. I was there for 7 days with Smokey at Caesars in Lake Tahoe. I could have gone. Frank was appearing at Harrah's next door, two casinos away. Now, I'd already worked Harrah's many times. So I was going to decide one night I was going to go see Frank's show because I had seen Frank perform, before, and I loved. He created more excitement walking to the microphone than most people do with their whole act. When he walked out and walked on that stage, the whole arena would go wild. The showroom would go wild. When I was a little boy shining shoes in all the bars, Frank was on the jukebox. When I came out of the service and I was tending bar, Frank was on the jukebox and all the guys would say, "Come fly with me. Let's fly away." And my buddies in my neighborhood say, the guys from the neighborhood, "Man, what would that be like? Flying with Frank Sinatra. Can you imagine that?" And what would be like. Now, this night, I'm going to go over and see Frank. For whatever reason, I picked this Wednesday night. As I rushed, I came off stage at Caesars and I didn't even change out of my clothes. I ran over to Harrah's and I'd already called the maitre d'. He was setting me up with a place, and I wanted to catch Frank's opening. I ran as fast as I could. I'm running into the showroom, and the vice president of Harrah's Hotel, a man named Holmes Hendrickson, saw me. And he said, "Tommy, come here." And I reluctantly went over there because I didn't want to miss Frank's opening.
Right.
He was talking to a big heavyset guy with a cigar. He said, "Tommy, this is Mickey Rudin." Well, I recognized the name. That was Frank Sinatra's lawyer. He was a very powerful guy in Hollywood. He said, "Mickey, this is Tom Dreesen. And I think Tom would make a great opening act for Frank Sinatra."
Wow.
The lawyer got a pained expression on his face like he heard that a million times.
Yeah.
He winked at the vice president. He looked at me. He said, "Hey, kid, if I gave you a week with Frank, would you want more than 50,000? I said, "Mr. Rudin, put it this way. If you gave me a week with Frank, would you want more than 50,000? He said, "Oh, I like this kid." And he started laughing, And a week later, they called me and said, "You want to do a week with Frank at the Golden Nugget in Atlantic City?" And I said, "Yeah." And I figured I'll try to get my picture taken with him. I'll hang it in every bar back in Chicago.
Right.
The second night I was with him, we were having dinner. He took me out to dinner, he and his wife. And I remember like it was yesterday, he set his knife and his fork down. He looked at me, he said, "I like your material and I like your style. I'd like you to do a few other dates with me if you're interested." And I didn't say, "Let me check my calendar." I said, "Yeah." And it turned into 14 years of 45, 50 cities, a friendship that I miss him every day of my life. I was a pallbearer at his funeral and I spoke at his funeral. And he became like a father to me. At first, he was the boss of this tour. Then later, he became like a buddy. We hung out together because he never went to bed till the sun came up. So I hung with him all those years. And then toward the end of his life, he became more like a father to me.
Was he a happy a happy person, or his mood, like in 14 years, like as he got older, did his personality change? Like a, a superstar like that can't be, not a lot of people can handle that, right?
He was always, he said way before I met him, I saw him on an interview. You can find it on YouTube. I think it was Walter Winchell, but they were talking to him and he said, I'm a 24 karat manic depressive. He said, you know, he had highs and lows.
Yeah.
That was long before they ever had the thing called Prozac or stuff like that.
Right.
Toward the end of his life, he was taking a thing called Alavil, I think, or something like that. But because he had highs and lows. But I have to tell you, I made up my mind when I first met him. I saw him go off on some people once in a while. I made up my mind, if he ever does that to me, I'm going to grab his hand and shake it and say, Frank, thank you for this wonderful tour. I've enjoyed every minute of it. And I'm walking out because I'm not anybody's whipping boy.
Right.
And I won't be, you know, but I loved him and I loved his show and everything, but I wasn't going to be that. And that day never came. I'm very fortunate that day never came. Had it come, I would have walked out. But I would have shook his hand and thanked him. But I really think, again, we had such a you know, I think he sensed that in me too, that I wasn't the kind of guy that's going to be
take it. Right. Yep.
But you know, I had 3 children, girl, boy, girl. Frank had 3 children, girl, boy, girl. You know, I'm half Irish and half Sicilian. Frank was half Sicilian. You know, I grew up in saloons because my mother was a bartender and I was a poor kid shining shoes in all the bars. And Frank's mom and dad had a saloon in Hoboken called Marty O'Brien's Bar and Grill. His father was a boxer, and there was so much prejudice against Italians in those days. He had the box under an Italian name, you know, I mean, an Irish name, you know, because anyhow, that's another story. So we had a lot in common, you know, and when we got together, you know, that's what we talked about. When we got together, as I said earlier, he was a kid from Hoboken and I was a kid from the south side of Chicago.
That's unbelievable. And do you still keep in touch with his family?
Well, you know, Barbara's passed away, and his and the president of Charlie, of Frank Sinatra Enterprises, Charlie Pignon, is a good friend of mine. But the 2 daughters and I don't get along, and I like them both. I would get along with them, but they hate me because Barbara was a friend of mine, and they hated Barbara Sinatra. But I stayed in their home for 14 years, 6 times a year.
Right.
And Frank treated me like a son. You know, I couldn't denounce her because Tina and Nancy hated her. Right. They still hate her. She's been dead for years and they still hate her. And they dislike me because I was a friend. But that, by the way, that's another trait Frank Sinatra had. Frank Sinatra, if you were his friend when you were rich and famous, you were his friend when you were poor and unknown. That didn't change, you know.
Which is uncommon in show business. You know, I struggle with that a lot, Tom. There's what I'm seeing now at the 10-year mark is a lot of guys I started with, things are starting to happen and they're changing toward me because things are happening for them at another level. And there's a YouTube video that you posted a really while back, a lesson that Frank Sinatra taught you about show business. And I think I've shared it with Brian before. I watch it anytime I feel like that someone's an asshole toward me. And I don't remember. I don't want to quote you, but it was something.
I'll do the story for you, but I'll also tell you, those guys and those men and women that now treat you different because they've got a little bit of success, they never were your friends.
Yep.
They never were.
Yep, 100%.
But here's the other thing too. Frank Sinatra told me, he said, Tommy, there was a time I was the hottest thing in the country. He said, Tom, I could pick up the phone and call any recording company, any agent, any manager, and they'd take my call. He said, I could call the president of the United States, and he took my call. He said, then I got cold. A couple of years went by, and I couldn't get anybody to take my call. My career was really on its rear end.
Yep.
And he said, and I couldn't get anyone to take my call. And then I got hot from the movie From Here to Eternity. He said, I became hot again. And now I was on top again. And I would go to a social event and I look across the room and there's that guy that wouldn't take my call. And I'd look at him. I'd look him in the eye, and he couldn't look me in the eye. He'd put his head down. He said, Frank said, but what he didn't understand is now I understood that we're in show business. That's two words, show and business. I couldn't do business for him. So that's why he didn't take my call. He said it was my fault. I thought we were friends. Mm-hmm. That wasn't his fault. That's my fault. I thought we were friends. That was so eye-opening to me that I shared it with other comedians. So, again, a while back, believe it or not, a friend of mine did something to me that really shocked me. And I was angry. And it was a guy I played golf with. And I went, and a couple of days later, I saw him. And I was treating him indifferent. And he said to me, Tommy, everything okay? I said, can I talk to you? And I took him out in the parking lot. And I told him the story. And I said, but I'm not blaming you. I'm blaming me. It's my fault. I thought we were friends. Oh, Tommy, don't say that. Don't say it. I said, no, I was your friend, but you weren't mine. Mm-hmm. What you did to me, I would have never done to you. Now, wow. I learned that lesson from Frank. Now this guy, I'll be honest with you, this guy, now he's emailing me and texting me and all that. But it was eye-opening, and it woke him up to something as well.
It's just insane because in this business, that happens a lot. People get weird with the phone. But again, I got a comedian friend that says the Sicilian in me, I got that weird Guinea gene where if something happens, I read into it and I take it to another level too. And I feel like in show business, you can't do that either. Like if you send a text or an email or a phone call rather, and they don't pick up the call, but they used to, you can't drive yourself crazy.
Here's something else. I got to go, you guys. But I'm going to close with this. You know what? And you heard me say this before, Steve, that what happens to comedians, we all start out together, 4 or 5 of us, whatever it is, and mm-hmm. we're constant people, we're encouraging one another. And then all of a sudden, somebody you started out with is doing the Kimmel show or one of those shows, and they're moving up and they're going up the ladder, and you say, I started out with Steve, and now he's doing this. And as I told you, comedians in Chicago, you are never in competition with another comedian. There's a quotation that was called mm-hmm. a proverb, but a lot of people think Ernest Hemingway said it, but he said, there's nothing noble about being superior to another human being. True nobility lies in being superior to your former self. Am I a better friend than I was last year? Am I a better father than I was last year? Am I a better son? Am I a better neighbor than I was last year? Am I a better comedian than I was last year? That's your only competition. And the rest of your life, listen to your tapes. Have I grown in the last year? You are not in competition with another comedian. You're only in competition with your former self, And by the way, there is no such thing as funniest or funnier. They're
right.
all.
It's all subjective. Yep.
So subjective. Yep. Who's funny? Who makes you laugh? Yep. One time I was on a show with 5 on Dinah Shore show with 5 comedians, and Dinah Shore said, "Who's the funniest person in the country, Tom?" And I said, "Don Polizzi." She said, "He's a comedian?" I said, "No, he's my cousin, but he's so funny." When he walks into a room, I fall apart. He just looks at me, and I start laughing. So the funniest person in the world is the person that makes you laugh.
Yeah.
Anyhow, guys, I've had a great time.
Hey, Tom, can you shout out your show, August 27th in Atlantic City, what our listeners can expect if they go that night? And again, thank you for doing the podcast.
I'm glad to do it. August 27th, I'm at and Saturday night, I'm at the Ocean View Resort in Atlantic City with a guy named Michael Morietti, who has a 20-piece orchestra. And he does an incredible tribute to Frank Sinatra with his music. And I do the comedy and the storytelling. I have a one-man show that I do around the country called The Man Who Made Sinatra Laugh. It's a 90-minute show that I do of stand-up comedy and storytelling. And I'll abbreviate it for this show. It's a 90-minute show between us both. So, but I'll do stand-up comedy, and then I'll go to a bar and I'll start telling funny stories about touring with Frank. And I got video and still photos that authenticate the story I'm telling. So it's going to be a lot of fun.
Awesome, Tom. I'll be
Sounds
there.
Awesome.
Can't wait. And again, thank you for your time. We really appreciate it.
Well, Steve, if you're going to be there, you guys, I want you to let me know. Let me know. I want you to come backstage and so we can say hello. I'd like to meet you.
My wife would love that. You get me in a really good spot with her right now.
Don, my rear and I have been the best of buddies for years.
Yeah, I'm aware of that because I watched his I used to be a big fan of his podcast, Live at the Laugh Factory, and you got, man, the stories you guys have, and just you could tell you're the same type of people, you know.
Well, I gravitate, and I keep saying we're close. When I came out here to Hollywood, I can't stand Hollywood people. I can't stand these bullshit Hollywood people who get producers on a sitcom, and all of a sudden they want a limo sent for them, and then they're sitting down to eat, and someone said, "I saw you on. Oh, can't I have a meal without you bothering me?" I want to strangle them. I can't stand them pompous ass bullshit show business people in Hollywood. So I would always gravitate to neighborhood people. Yep. You know, there was a time out here in Hollywood that I hung around. We had a group called the IMO, Italian Men Only. It was Joe Pesci. It was Frankie Avalon, James Darren, Joe Mantegna. It was Tony Danza. It was Dennis Farina. It was Craig Martin, Dean Martin's son.
It sounds like your golf crew, man. I seen some of your golfing pictures. That's your crew.
Oh,
I seen a picture of you and Justin Timberlake on the golf course. I was like, man, Dreesen's schooling these people.
But these were guys. You know, Frankie was from South Philly. Frankie Valli was from Newark. Joe Pesci. We were all street guys. We all came from a neighborhood. But out here, when we got together, we didn't talk about whose career was doing this or that. We just got together and had some pasta and
shot the shit.
Yeah, and then just, to me, it was just that's who I gravitated to. You know. By the way, after the Will Smith incident, comics are going on stage a little bit leery, right? And the following Saturday, I go on stage at the Laugh Factory, and I got a killer crowd, and I'm doing real good. But when you first come off stage, that spotlight in your eye, as I'm coming off stage, a guy with a hat pulled down over his head and sunglasses reached out and put his arms out, and then went, whoa, and he put his arms around. It was Justin Timberlake. He came to see the show, but he came in after the lights went out because otherwise people would bother him to death, you know.
Yeah.
But he just wanted to let me know he was there. But I thought it was some guy coming at me. For a moment.
They getting slapped.
God bless you, man. Thank you for what you do. And as somebody that's young in this game, I bring you up to everybody, and a million thank you a million times. And I'll see you at your show August 27th. Again, Sinatra, an evening of laughter, music, and stories with Tom Dreesen, Ocean Casino in Atlantic City. Tom, thank you again.
You're welcome. Bring that Licata guy with you too.
I will.
Sir. Sounds good.
Okay, guys. Good talk.
Bye. Bye.